dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and Dave Patterson remains Dave Patterson, Liberty Nation's national security correspondent. So, Dave, thanks for sticking around. We were talking earlier in the show about what it means that the UK, Canada, and Australia decided to not so much acknowledge that there should be a two-state solution and that Palestinians deserve a state, but really they're trying to push the ball forward on that and coming into, what would you say, like a congruence with a lot of other nations. Now, there are two really notable nations that are not backing this kind of rhetoric at the moment. Number one is obviously Israel, which we've discussed. It's from an Israeli perspective, it's a terrible idea to have an actual state on your doorstep that wants to destroy you, assuming that Hamas would have something to do with that state, which they probably would, because how can you tell if somebody's Hamas or Hamas sympathetic? It's almost impossible, I think. But there's also, and this is the most important one, the United States. So the United States hasn't gotten on that train under President Donald Trump. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's unlikely that President Trump will get on this train, as you put it. He has a relationship with Netanyahu. I think he agrees with Netanyahu that any sort of a Palestinian state that neighbors Israel is really an existential threat to Israel. And because once you let that idea percolate and become real, now again, Israel is faced with a real Palestinian state that really is cohesive in its desire to destroy them. Have you ever heard a single Palestinian leader say, yes, I think Israel should be a country, and I agree that they should be a legitimate entity, and we would see a way to have peace with them? Have you ever heard that?
Well, no, but I have heard from the river to the sea, which would essentially negate the existence of any Israeli nation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's sort of a clue, I think. You know, as you're looking at this, that there's very little chance that there would be a benevolent Palestine on the borders of Israel. And Israel has fought this battle since 1947. And they're going to be pretty hard to convince otherwise.
You know, Dave, you and I are big fans of the wonderful author James Clavell.
Yes,
who wrote for those of you who are not totally familiar with him, he wrote the Taipan book, which was of the Asian Saga, the book series there. And there's Shogun. There's a big TV show made of Shogun now, which it's surprisingly good. The lead actors in that are fantastic. But the last book in the Asian Saga by James Clavell was called Whirlwind. Obviously, Dave knows this. I'm just giving this exposition for our audience here. And it was about 1979 in Iran and the downfall and the rise of the Islamist state that we see today. And the last couple of pages in that, Dave, and you'll remember this. It's one guy, I think he's a mujahideen of some description. He's wandering off with his horse or his donkey, and he's thinking to himself that, and this is how he puts it, that these foreigners, these Westerners, they're willing to give so much for one single life that there's no way they can ultimately beat us, because that, I guess you'd call it, what would you say? That reverence for even a single life doesn't mean anything in the greater cause of things for us. And so we'll always win. And that was written it was written after 1979, of course. But I think that holds very, very true for right now, that if there are, and what's happening, that's how Hamas really prosecutes their war against the Israelis. They don't care about a single life, an individual life, the Hamas terrorists. They use civilians, women, children, non-combatants as human shields. They put them in places that are likely to get bombed because they're storing weapons caches there. And then they weep about it to a friendly media and say, look at the horrible things they're doing. They're aiming at these buildings where there are women and children that they've put there specifically to elicit sympathy. And so they're willing to sacrifice all the lives they can in their cause. Whereas most Western, I think all Western nations view this as this is the wrong thing to do. But it does put Israel in a very tricky situation, doesn't it, Dave? Because unless they're willing to engage in that kind of war brutality, and some would say that they already are. But of course, really they could just carpet bomb. If they really wanted to just kill all the Palestinians, they could just carpet bomb Rafah, for example. But unless they're willing to engage in that kind of war fighting, is there any way that they can actually get rid of Hamas root and branch?
It's going to be very difficult. I mean, there's no question about that. But at the same time, I think that there's this interesting dynamic between Israel and the United States. As long as President Trump and the United States National Security Team does not come out specifically and say, stop doing this, you can't do this anymore, they're going to provide the weapons whereby Israel can, in fact, start to clean out Hamas to the very last person. And yes, you're right. I mean, but remember the Western ethos, for want of a better term, during World War II. We were perfectly happy to carpet bomb Dresden. We used 2 nuclear bombs on Japan because at the time, the sign of the times was that if you don't do this, you will have this terrible, terrible cancer with you forever and will cost you hundreds of thousands of people. And to your point, yes, they don't care. I mean, they are in fact a death cult. And they act like one, they talk like a death cult, and so you have to look at them that way. And in the end, it's very, it's really awful to say, but we've got more bullets than you've got people.
Yes, well, by we, I presume you mean Israel with the support
Help
of
the United States, of course.
Yeah, it's. I don't see any way out of a tragic situation, but I do see it continuing almost indefinitely, because how do you defeat an ideology, even one that's predicated on, even one so bad that it's predicated on the death of another people? I don't see how you root that out, because it's not, and we should really talk about this. What kind of effect this announcement that UK, Australia, and Canada are supporting the creation of a Palestinian state, like what kind of effect that will have on the wider Arab world around Israel? Because there were a few years ago there were signs of progress with the Abraham Accords that I thought would really be. I really thought that there was something happening there that could bring everything together. But Hamas exists because it has the support of its neighboring states. I mean, we've seen this. The leadership of Hamas, they go off to other countries where they get put up in top hotels and treated like royalty, only to come back and continue waging war. I guess my question is, what are the other Arab states around the area? Are they thinking that this benefits them, or are they thinking deep down, and I suspect this is true to some level, that they're also terrified of Hamas being in control of Palestinians, that they might want a Palestinian state for Palestinian people, but the idea that Hamas could, pull back and pretend that it's not Hamas and then end up in charge of an actual country. Aren't they a little bit frightened by that? Because
Yeah, I think they are, and I think that's why you have Egypt saying, "Don't bring Palestinians into Egypt." Jordan says, "Don't bring Palestinians into Jordan." I think that's exactly why. It's very interesting. I was at a conference not too many years ago, and I was talking with the ambassador, one of the Arab countries, the Arab ambassador to the EU. And I said, I don't understand what's going on here, because here you have the United Arab Emirates, you have Qatar, you have Kuwait, and they have all these big building programs. Why don't you invite Palestinians down to be guest workers in all these programs? And she looked at me and she said, oh, if they left Palestine, the Israelis would take their land. What? But that's their thought process.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the mythology that they like, this victim ethos that they like to project of how poor me, and yet they're the ones who actually are helping to promulgate the problems that are going on in the region.
Dave Patterson, thanks ever so much for being with us. And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Mr. James Fight and Dave Patterson, and of course extend my sincerest thanks to you, the listeners, who take the time each and every week to tune in and join us here on the show. Please do remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.